Okay.
We're Graham and Pam Hunter. We live at South Otago, and we've lived here on this property at Tupeka West for 25 years now. And we're farming sheep and beef.
We're 1 hour's drive from central Otago and 1 hour's drive from the coast. Our mountain is the Blue Mountains here, and our river is the Mighty Clutha. We run about 1,600 ewes. Our cattle range from about say 50 to 130 or so, just depending on the season.
My name's Brent Mackey. We farm sheep, cattle and deer. We farm in the Clinton district, which is just between Balclutha and Gore.
Alistair and Bernadette Hunt, and we farm around about 600 hectares here at Chatton in Southland. Beef, sheep and arable, small bit of off-farm contracting. 2 girls, 9 and 13, and we've been here for 15 years after moving down from the Waikato. Yeah.
We had this wonderful opportunity to learn about basically regenerative farming. Well, I know that's a bit of a buzzword, but for me that really made farming much more exciting and interesting. And that was the first time, I think, that I really grasped what plants were doing and that whole wonderful process of photosynthesis. And which in very school terms is, capturing the energy from the sun. And every blade of grass here is a solar panel. And it's just amazing, it's drawing in that energy from the sun, and carbohydrates are being formed as we speak within this plant. And then there's this amazing exchange. These sugars are being converted and pushed down through the roots into the soil and feeding the biology. And the biology that's in there is then releasing what they're full of, which is all sorts of minerals, and pushing that back to the plant. So you've got this wonderful exchange. And when this exchange is going well, there's surplus carbon is being drawn from the carbon dioxide out of the air and is going down into the ground. And this is what's happening like with vegetative grass. But you've got to have the animals, they're all part of this system, and so much the discussion today is anti-animal, and that's what's really distressing, because it's just a basic fundamental cycle that if we didn't have the animals to come here to eat this grass, to keep this grass vegetative, this grass would just become tall and rank like the side of the road and be brown top, and totally reduce any photosynthesis that's happening, totally reduce any carbon sequestration that could occur. So it's this wonderful natural cycle, but animals have to be part of it.
Traditionally, New Zealand farming's been built around what the natural capital that we have. So producing stock or grain or whatever it is that we produce in the places that can naturally produce it, with the right rainfall, with the right sunshine hours, that kind of stuff. In Southland, large parts of Southland, like us, we produce the stock that this farm can naturally produce. We add a bit of fertiliser to make sure that we're not mining the soil. If we're taking stuff off, then we have to put it back in. But largely, our stocking and everything is based around what the farm can sustain naturally. That's changed in more recent years with the addition of irrigation and things like that. But in some ways, often that's about being more precise about it. And, there's a lot of thought and science goes in behind a lot of that. So yeah, there's exceptions to every rule, but largely I think New Zealand's advantage is that we use our natural resources to farm rather than creating artificial environments to farm.
I think New Zealand agriculture as well has evolved better than other countries in terms of whichever way you dress it up. This is one of the best places on the planet to grow grass. Mm-hmm. The market over the years, the global market has adjusted and allowed the development of that, not because somebody set out in 1800 to say, let's make New Zealand the grass growing capital of the world. It's just happens to be good. And so, this paddock that we're standing in here at the moment, the slopes and gullies and stuff in it mean that it's not really appropriate to grow much other than forage crops for animals. It's too dangerous to get harvesters round, and in places the soil's very thin. So having a grass sward, effectively livestock farmers turn sun and water into protein, into meat and wool. I can't see what's more sustainable than that. We can't eat grass ourselves. So, if we get rid of animal agriculture, which ultimately is where New Zealand is in the world stage, it's an animal agricultural country. If we get rid of them and our grasslands, we can eat pine trees. Yeah.
One of the sad things that's happening in farming at the moment, and especially in our area, is overseas buyers coming here to this region, this area, and they're buying our sheep and beef farms exactly like this. I think we're class 6 here, 6 or 7. That's sort of the grade of land it is, and they're just taking out all the fences, all the infrastructure. They're probably subdividing the house off to a lifestyle, and the whole shooting box is going into pine trees. So I think within 20k of here to the north, I think just top of my head, there's probably about 48,000 stock units lost just this winter that is going into pine trees.
I think in terms of planning for the legislation that's coming at us, lots of us, and us included, have just spent the last few days trying to nut out our budget for the 2023-24 season, so that's taking us right through to June 2024, and some of the stuff might be in place by then, but to be perfectly honest, we've actually just got to ignore it. Like, some of it is just so nuts and is going to send if it comes through the way they're talking about, it's going to send so many farmers out of business. You actually just can't even begin to factor it in. I know I kind of take the approach of, hoping that it'll get sorted out by the time we get there. I actually can't get my head around the fact that we as a country would implement a whole lot of legislation that will decimate our farming economy, because that's what our country is built on. So I guess I'm just holding on to hope that common sense will prevail at some point and some of this ridiculous stuff will be out the window. So rather than spending lots of time kind of crunching the numbers from a personal farming perspective, from our own business perspective, we kind of get on with doing things the way we do them and continually trying to improve. And there are things we invest in from a sustainability point of view, but in terms of trying to calculate into our budgets the taxes we might get for methane emissions, or for what resource consents for ridiculous winter grazing rules might cost us, we're not budgeting for them at the moment, because I just have to hope and pray that common sense will prevail.
Well, we're all part of Beef and Lamb. We're all Federated Farmers is voluntary. So Beef and Lamb, its fees are taken off at the freezing works. So yeah, that's compulsory.
So New Zealand's got a sort of a bit of a hybrid system. So, first and foremost in our minds, Bernie's heavily involved in feds, as many people will know, and then we've got Beef and Lamb, representing beef and sheep farmers under a levy funding system, and then Dairy NZ for dairy farmers, and then there's other horticultural irrigation-based things as well. But my feeling is that, particularly with the levy groups, is that ultimately easy for me to say, but I think they've become weak. And they are now fighting for justification of what they've achieved rather than actually fessing up and say, well, actually, it wasn't good enough. Yeah, because in business and in life, a bad deal's a bad deal. You can't polish a turd. And, you know, there's definitely a bit of a club between the organisations, some of the regional councils, and some of the levy groups. There's a bit of a you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, and we won't rock the boat if you agree to this. And that's how business works, don't get me wrong. But ultimately, they've become self-sustaining, and specifically with these new regulations, especially when there's government funding to these organisations to roll them out. I mean, what a gravy train that is. Perfect. It's just a gift that keeps on giving. I think the other thing is to be quite clear that all work that levy groups do isn't bad by any stretch. There's a hell of a lot of good people with good morals and largely good backgrounds that are, you know, championing New Zealand agriculture, and that is to be applauded. But what I would say is that we would spend, or our levy requirement in our business is probably 10 grand a year, that gets taken at point of slaughter for stock. And look, to be brutally honest, it's probably the worst return on investment in our business. Yeah.
They're supposed to be our advocates. So, yeah, we really are questioning that at the moment with this Hiwi Ekanoa. It just feels like we're heading into a big hole. And, you know, this methane tax is, as Pam was talking before, the cycle of growing grass and livestock eating it is a natural cycle. You know, they're going to tax that. You know, it's a natural cycle, for goodness sake. You know, our livestock, like this farm, is a carbon neutral farm. Because we've got 25% of this farm is in forestry or native bush. Plus we are sequestering carbon with our grass, which they don't even count. So our animals are they are carbon neutral because they're eating this special food. So, you know, this government's going to tax us on that.
In New Zealand, I hear it totaled and all the time that we're some of the lowest carbon footprint farmers in the world. You know, I've never done my numbers. I refuse to buy into that. You know, until they start talking about how much grass sequence and all my shelter belts and take that into consideration, I'm not even going to engage on it. Our farming's a bit different in New Zealand because if you go to England and a lot of these other countries, there's quite a bit of subsidies involved still, and probably not as high as they used to be, but they're still there. You know, so all this compliance that we're expected to do, like they've been talking about the compliance that they have to operate in England and Europe for years, and that's fine because they're being subsidised heavily. And there's a difference between being brought under compliance if you're being subsidised heavily to remain farming, but we do it all on our own bat. We're not subsidised. We survive. We have bad seasons. We have good seasons, and you know, all this paperwork and all this compliance stuff that we have to do. Overseas, they're paid. There's more money to be made on a farm in some of those countries by going into the office and filling out the paperwork than there is actually farming real livestock. But we operate in the real world where we have to farm livestock or grow grain or to survive. That's how we make money at the end of the day.
Our issue with the legislation that's coming at us is not an issue with being sustainable, and I think that's a really misunderstood thing in terms of why farmers are pushing back on some of this stuff. You know, it's not because we don't want to do the right thing. We absolutely want to be sustainable. Farming and the way we operate, we're constantly investing $1 now for what it might deliver 2 years in the future, you know, or longer. You know, we buy a calf now and won't see any income from that, you know, for a couple of years. And we drench animals now, and, you know, it's a cost now, but, you know, we trust that there's going to be a benefit to that. So we do that all the time, and it's not always money benefit either. So, you know, fencing off a waterway and planting some trees, we do that because we know it's the right thing to do, not because it's going to deliver us any money return, and certainly not because we might even never benefit from the improved fresh water, but the next generation will. So we do that all the time. And I think a lot of the improvements that have come out around in the last 5 or 10 years from farming have come a lot from education. One example, you know, is back in 2014, there was some research that came out of Telford, and that highlighted 3 or 4 specific things that if farmers did these really simple things around their winter grazing, then the effects on fresh water would be drastically improved, or the negative effects would be reduced. And farmers pretty quickly started to adopt those things. All they needed to do was understand and be told, and then they started to adopt them. And everybody doesn't adopt them instantly, but there's an exponential effect. You know, this year 2 people, and next year 4 people, and next year 6 people, and then suddenly the compound effect. And now, 10 years later, it's really, really widespread. That, you know, you leave buffers to your waterways, you think about your grazing direction. Some of those really simple things that we do around winter grazing are now just broadly accepted as the way things are done around here. So yeah, farmers definitely are long-term looking and forward-thinking and all of those things. Where our big issue is with this legislation is that there just won't be a benefit to lots of the cost that it's going to impose on us. So, you know, turning around and getting a resource consent for our winter grazing, when we know we're already doing it right and all of that's going to give us is a bit of paper to say that we can carry on doing it, where's the benefit to that? We could instead have been spending that money and time on actually doing things that are going to have a benefit, or paying a tax for our methane emissions. All that's going to do is potentially drive our production down to reduce the amount of tax that we pay, and then some other country with way higher emissions will, you know, fill that gap in food production. So that's our big issue with the policy that's coming at us, is we know it's not going to have a benefit, and actually some of it will make life worse and make things worse. The stuff around Indigenous biodiversity is actually going to drive people to not protect you know, areas with Indigenous biodiversity, or to not plant native trees, because you don't want to end up with a massive cost imposed on you later. So actually, it's not only is it not going to have a benefit, it's going to make outcomes worse. And that's why farmers are pushing so hard against some of this stuff.
Some of this legislation, we don't really know how it's going to affect us fully yet. The emissions trading side of it, the carbon credits, you know, they need to change. Before I'm going to engage in any of the discussion, they need to come to the table in an honest way. Again, I expect honesty. Yeah, I don't expect Air New Zealand to be able to buy my farm, plant it all out in trees, and for them to keep putting all their pollution at 27,000 feet, business as usual. In the meantime, they've cut this area that produces food for people, and to this date, I don't think if I did a Google search, there is a recipe for pine needles and pine cones. Yeah.
Look, I think some of the current legislation, it's not market-led, okay? So most farmers can smell a rat. We're pretty down-to-earth people, and it's virtue signalling. You know, one of the co-ops we supply, I read their newsletter yesterday, and it was all negative of China's demand is down, the US has got a drought, so they're killing more stock. There was a very negative tone, and at the same time we're steered towards lower output, more sustainable ways to grow food to an ever increasing, shrinking global food supply. So someone's going to go hungry.
Good government works with people. It works for them. It fully engages in an honest way, and it works with people. But we don't have a government that works and engages honestly with the farming sector. The consultation process looks like we've basically made up our mind of what's going to happen, and then we'll go and consult with you. That gives you the impression that there's been a process where you've had the right to engage, but really it's fait accompli. They've made their mind up of what they're going to do, and the giving and taking will be very narrow, and at the end of the day it's going to make it hard to produce food. I see what's happening with farming in New Zealand. It's not just happening here, it's happening all over the world. Right now, farming in every country in this, I'll call it the so-called free world, is being hammered with regulation, restrictions, to the point that it's going to drive down the global food production. Now, there's no mountains of butter, there's no mountains of meat and food that is waiting to get to somebody's shore in a boat. Like there was years ago, we had probably 6 or 7 months global supply of grain, but now we're down to days. Now, if you look at that, if a major hiccup happened, you could even associate the war between the Ukraine and Russia, where that grain, where some of that food supply gets really threatened. I just see that when they drive down food production, it's going to put it in the hands of the people that really at the end of the day don't care about the people. They just care about making big money and controlling, because if you control the food, you control the people. It's the only thing that maintains control in society is people having food. And right now, with the restrictions from what they've done in India, from over in Holland, New Zealand, it's happening in America, the production of food's been driven down. It's only going to end bad for the people in the cities. Their main security is the fact that they have food in their supermarkets.
We're being sold this line that if we do all of these things, we reduce our emissions and we pay these methane taxes and we have resource consents to prove that we're doing a good job and all of that kind of stuff, that's what consumers want. They're willing to pay a higher price, apparently, if we can say on the label that we do those things. But actually, when you think about most people, when they go to the supermarket and they look at a bunch of beef roasts on a supermarket shelf, they're looking at the price. They're not looking at the label that says 0 emissions, or, a very few people might be, but you kind of think, what path are we on where we're willing to force all these extra costs on our production, and we're being, they're trying to convince us that will come back and to our benefit because we'll receive a higher price for our product. It's pretty hard to believe when prices, everybody's talking about the cost of living and price rises and being able to make ends meet. And in England at the moment, they're talking about, there'll be plenty of people that have to make choices between having their power switched off and buying their weekly shop. They don't give a toss whether or not our meat's got a label on it that says it's 0 carbon.
No, that's dead right.
The pressure that's been put on farming right now is it's awful, really. It just seems to be that we're just having to comply with this and comply with that, and it's like for the last 100 or so years that we've been farming, farms that we've done nothing but go out and abuse our farms and abuse our livestock and ruin the environment. And I take issue with that because none of us get out of bed in the morning planning to go out and do environmental damage to our farms, or to cause harm to our livestock.
I think what the real problem is the climate change debacle. And if people are going to take that on board and fully embrace climate change, then we're doomed. But unless people actually begin to understand that it is a fabrication and start to really stop running with the masses on this one, that it's politicised, and get that word out there, because our young people are getting totally brainwashed in the universities and at the schools. Look, sure, we have pollution, we have issues of environmental issues, and us farmers have made a lot of mistakes over the years, and we're learning and we're pulling our heads in, and we are responsible for some water contamination and runoffs. I think most farmers are acknowledging all that, but we're not actually going to take responsibility for warming the planet. Thank you very much. I think that's a pretty big accusation, and I think it's just about being really informed and challenging that narrative.
You know, other, less developed countries around the world, if people had a real fly on the wall feel for just how things roll in some of those places, both in terms of how humans are treated, the remuneration they get for their work, animal welfare, access to understanding of how to farm animals. It's a lot more survival of the fittest, that's why it's cheaper. That's why it's cheaper. There's huge parts of Brazil that have got quite good pockets of climate for animal agriculture, but there's no roads, there's no rail, the electricity supply is not good enough to have animals in a slaughterhouse and the power goes off, so then what do they do with them? They can't keep the meat reliably cold. It can take 2 weeks to get it to port. The legislation we've been talking about this morning, that's where our production is going to go. So it's the old saying, be careful what you wish for.
My job is to produce high quality food of animals that have been looked after, animals that have been worried about when you take their wool off them and it's a cold night and you go and shift them during the night to make sure that they're going to be fine, up until the day that they are loaded onto a truck and sent away to be processed, There's no money in not looking after those animals up to that point.
We actually love farming, and we love this beautiful land that we live here. We love our animals, and our animals are a wee bit like our children. If they're happy, we're happy, and so we love to make sure that they're fully fed, watered and sheltered every day. We love to produce superfood here, so that we can help and feed other people in this world.
My aim would be, with this farm, would be to leave it in a better health and a better state for the next generation to take it over. It's not that I want to hand it over all destroyed, the environment, We've got three creeks on our farm that I wouldn't hesitate, on a good day, without it being a massive flood, to go and drink water out of. We've got eels in them, we've got lobsters, they're full of life, and what we get over the media is that, you can't swim in these rivers and the rivers are dangerous and they're toxic. Well, that's a nonsense. The waterways around the big cities are in a far worse state than on most farms. We aim to produce good, healthy, happy animals, in a sense, like for the market. And there's no money, there's no future in not doing that. But they're just making it so hard. And I sort of made my decision that I didn't want this lifestyle for my boys, because hey, they have a life now on their jobs that they've got, and unless there's some positive stuff comes out where a government's going to say, well, it's nice to be appreciated, it's nice to be thanked, you know. We're not asking to be patted on the back every 5 minutes, because basically we just go out and do the business. We just want to be left alone, you know, and that's all we want. We just want to be left alone.